So I believe we can start. That's with... Good afternoon, and please allow me to welcome you to this afternoon's panel, focusing on people on the move and measures to improve outreach and support. This panel concludes the trilogy of sessions at this year's Vienna Migration Conference, focusing on developments and approaches to enhance protection of the rights of people on the move. Just as a reminder, this session builds on the conversation we had with UNHCR on a routes-based approach, as well as on a very interesting and engaging session that has just concluded previously, focusing on external processing. In this session, we will look into practices and concepts that are already in place along migratory routes. They provide information, counseling, and other services to prospective migrants, to people on the move, to people in need of international protection, as well as to return migrants, so that they can make informed decisions about their movements. We currently have a testimony of more than 68,000 missing migrants since 2014, and there are many more that we are not aware of, unfortunately. This calls for an urgent action to inform people about the dangers of irregular migration, to provide counseling along the routes, and to offer alternatives. We've heard in the previous panel that countries of destination have double struggles. On one hand, they struggle to reach out to intending migrants and to inform them that irregular routes are dangerous and that irregular arrivals have low prospects of a long-term stay. And on the other side, they have a struggle to attract labor with relevant qualifications. Thus, the panel today is designed to help us learn from some promising concepts as a response to these challenges. And it is my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Mr. Carsten Schmitz-Hoffmann, GIZ Director General for Europe, Mediterranean and Central Asia, who will share with us GIZ's experiences in working in this area, also bringing development aspects and considerations into the scope. Our second guest, who is joining us online, is Mr. Daniel Delgado from the US Department of Homeland and Security, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Border and Immigration Policy. As already noted, joining us remotely and sharing with us about the US experience with the Safe Mobility Offices. And Mr. Bram Frouws from Mixed Migration Center Director, who will help us understand more about applicability of the Safe Mobility Offices to European context, as Mixed Migration Center has recently published a report on this topic. Thank you for being with us today. My name, last, is Marija Raus. I serve as the head of Silk Routes region with ICMPD in Vienna. And before we dive into the questions for our guests and panelists, we have prepared a short video to summarize in a couple of minutes a work of ICMPD in this domain that we conduct through our migrant resource centers. I would kindly ask the colleagues to play the video.
Migrant Resource Center, MRC, is a flagship initiative of International Center for Migration Policy Development, ICMPD. MRC aims to promote safe and regular migration, reduce irregular migration through awareness raising, community education, information campaign, and provide reintegration support service, referrals to potential intending, outgoing, and returning migrants.
MRC is a physical facility located within partner government premises, jointly supervised by the International Center for Migration Policy Development and relevant ministries dealing with labor and migration, funded by the European Union and donor countries. With a strong presence in major Silk Route and Central Asian countries, ICMPD have 11 operational MRCs, with 2 upcoming by end of 2024. The MRCs have reached to 120 million people through mass media campaigns. In addition, over 770,000 individuals have been reached through counseling, pre- and post-departure sessions, and community outreach programs. MRCs utilize multiple platforms and strategies to reach their audience through a 3-pronged approach: outreach, individual support, and partnerships.
FIA एक वाहद अदारा है जो कि इस इलीगल माइग्रेशन को डील कर रहा है। FIA जो है ICMPD इसके साथ मिलके बहुत सारे अवेयरनेस के सेशन जो हैं वो तकरीबन साल में बहुत सारे करवा रही है।
The 3-pronged approach of MRC encompasses 6 thematic areas: legal pathways, regular migration, awareness raising on the risks of irregular migration, labor migration, return and reintegration services including partnerships for employment and skills development, humanitarian admissions, resettlement and complementary pathways, migration intelligence to governments for informed decision-making on migration issues. MRCs across the Silk Route countries have made notable progress in providing migration support. In Afghanistan, MRC collaborates with organizations like the Yaran Foundation to connect Afghan women with international opportunities. MRC Bangladesh engages faith-based groups through workshops, while MRC Iraq offers tailored psychosocial support and CV preparation sessions for returnees. In Pakistan, MRCs run mass media campaigns and partner with over 40 academic and private institutions to raise awareness about migration issues. MRC Sri Lanka supports victims of human trafficking. And MRC Tajikistan focuses on counseling for safe migration. Meanwhile, MRC Uzbekistan is in the process of establishing its operations.
Атайын еліне жолығушы болып, түсіндіру іштері жүргізілді. Елімізге бүгінгі күнде актуалдуу маселелердин бири анткени жаштарыбыз, орто жаштагылардын баары чет өлкөгө чыгуу максатында жумуш издөө алдында жүрүшөт. Биз дагы өз учурунда бул жолугушууда айтылган нерселердин баарын коомчулукка, элге жеткизүүгө
Mr. Schmitz-Hoffmann, my first question is for you as we want to analyze and learn from promising concepts today. GIZ operates centers for migration and development. They have some similarities but also differences with the concept that ICMPD is applying, and in many places we cooperate and provide and develop synergies together. What we know is that GIZ Centers for Migration and Development provide different kinds of services, including information provision, counseling, and similar to people intending to migrate regularly within their region or forward. But we would like to hear from you a bit more on these centers. Where do they operate? What kinds of services do they provide? And what kinds of migrants do they serve usually? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, as you rightly said, the Centers for Migration and Development are following in particular a development approach. They are all funded with the basic funding from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and then have additional co-funding depending on the focus of the country and on the focus of the topic. All centers are basically covering 3 main topics. That is regular regional migration, the second is regional migration towards Europe, and the third is reintegration of returnees. And as said, depending on the focus of the centers, we then also embed additional co-financing from the European Union, from the Swiss government, from other partners. So the vision is to support people throughout the entire migration cycle, and our experience really shows that we can leverage the potential of migration for people to strategically utilize in a way that it actually benefits both potential and returning migrants, as well as the countries of origin and destination. So what we want to do is to really develop the capacities to enable our partner structures in the countries where we're operating in to support potential migrants and sustainable reintegration in a target group-specific and sustainable manner. We do that in a number of countries, and we are currently in different phases. We are establishing the centers currently in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Ghana, in Nigeria, and in Jordan. One additional center is planned to be launched this year in Indonesia. We have already existing centers in Albania, the Gambia, Kosovo, and Serbia, who are currently in a transformation phase to be more embedded in the local structures. And that process has already successfully been completed in Senegal. So there are a number of centers who are all in different phases and following specific focus areas. But in general, they are all seen as a one-stop shop. So the centers serve as a point of contact for people who wish to migrate for work, for vocational training, or for education, as well as for people returning from Germany, Europe, or other countries to find support with their social and economic reintegration. Of course, we don't do that alone. We are seeking cooperation with partners in every country where we're operating in. And we, of course, in all cases work with the local government. That is the substantial basis that we need to really design the centers in a sustainable way, and very often with local NGOs, but also with other international partners and international service providers like the Goethe Institute, also depending on, for example, the language courses that we are using, etc. So the idea is to empower people to make really informed and conscious decisions regarding migration. What are the needs of people that we have seen in the experience of running these centers? Now, in the last 12 months, we have seen that more than 5,500 people have been interested in migration and consulted the respective centers and learned about the possibilities of regular migration to Germany, the EU, and within the respective region. And in the same period, about 2,300 returnees from Germany and the European Union have been supported in their way back into their home country. It's important to emphasize that we also make about 50% of those people with female background, so it's also following a woman focus, and this also illustrates I think the effectiveness of the centers so far, these figures. Let me give you a couple of examples. One is a young person who regularly migrated to Germany from Iraq and who was living in Germany for 6 years, and because of the lack of perspective that he had, he wanted to go back to Iraq, and there consulted the respective center, and he illustrated his plan to do his own business, and we basically trained him. We developed a business plan together with him, and eventually he opened his own shop and is now running that shop. And the same case, but the other way around, we had with a young person from Ghana who always dreamt of becoming a SAP consultant. And so he was trained in respective IT technologies and in consulting services, and after that and in language courses, and after that training he migrated to Germany and is planning to gain further experience in Germany and then go back to Ghana to open his own consultancy service for SAP. So this illustrates how both ways work and how we can really fill with life our 360-degree approach and serve this idea of being a one-stop shop. We also see further opportunities in labor migration with regards to additional partners. So we seek more collaboration with the private sector. We also implement the idea of triple win concepts, and we are trying to invite respective private sector companies to seek with us opportunities to prepare people through the centers to get into respective jobs in Europe or in Germany, and already have job applications from the private sector and job opportunities that they can then make use of. So this illustrates the way how we create the ownership of the local institutions, how we empower the people to make really informed decisions, and how we, through that, also support the respective development vision that we are following.
Thank you very much. From my point, I would like to emphasize an important element that is surfacing from your presentation, and that is that empowerment of people going in all directions is in the focus of the Centers for Migration of Development, which emphasizes the rights-based approach, which is commendable and very much needed in migration management and governance in general. The last element that you have added, if I can explore just a bit further, engagement of private sector actors. Maybe we can share a bit more, exchange experiences with this element. How we've heard about the struggles of countries, double struggles that they have in terms of preventing irregular migration, but then also attracting labor. And now talking to private sector in Europe, how interested are they to engage in these type of endeavors to import labor through cooperation with the Centers for Migration and Development?
I think it's depending, of course, on the sector that you're operating in. So we see there's a lot of demand, for example, for nurses and for medical support personnel, skilled labor we're talking about. Of course, people, if there is a certain demand from that particular sectors, then have to go through a language course. We check their respective licenses before that and see if they have the appropriate bureaucratic requirements fulfilled. We do that together with the German Agency for Labor, with the federal agency, and prepare the people then to really go into a what we call fair and sustainable skilled migration or skilled worker migration. To distinguish also from other approaches, so the companies really know what they get. We are always building on respective agreements with the countries where the people come from, so that we are not going into a brain drain, but really only take the respective surplus from the market and make sure that people are then going into fair working conditions with the companies. And they pay for that, so it's a payment system that the companies pay for, and that is working well in the sectors where there is sufficient demand.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Delgado, you can hear us well, I hope. Yes.
I can, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Safe mobility offices are another promising concept that we would like to explore together with you today. We understand that you are working in close cooperation with both IOM and UNHCR in the operations of the safe mobility offices. So what we would like to hear from you is about the services that SMOs provide to migrants and to people in need of international protection, and also a bit of your experience in bringing together relevant counterparts from the US government, stakeholders in host countries where people are applying for services of the safe mobility offices, as well as other actors that are needed and relevant for provision of relevant support services.
Sure, and again, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this a bit. this is really such an important topic, and as evident as, other individuals and colleagues who are on the panel, but also those who are in the room know very well that this is an ongoing issue that we're looking at novel solutions to resolve. I do want to touch on one point that you had previously just referenced in the prior presentation, and it's really this important right for migrants to migrate safely, orderly, and humanely, but also to not migrate, right? And this has been something that we have been well aware of and tracking, and really plays a critical piece into our broader initiative and approach to what has ultimately led to the Safe Mobility Initiative and ultimately established these safe mobility offices in key countries throughout the hemisphere. But to put this in a bit of a broader context from what the United States has been facing and what has ultimately led to those decisions and the Safe Mobility Initiative, I think it's important to note sort of what of our history has been here just in the last couple of years and what we have been facing in the U.S. immigration system, specifically looking at these historic levels of migration, not just in our hemisphere, but really throughout the world, right? We are looking at more people being displaced today than at any time since World War II. And I believe, specifically in the United States, as an example, is that our immigration systems are not built or have not been updated in order to really address what we're seeing in terms of today's migration context. Much of this and what we're seeing is really the result of violence, food insecurity, severe poverty, corruption, climate change, the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a number of other factors that have really contributed to these mass movements of people around the world, which really boils down to the simple fact that more people than ever are grappling with this decision to migrate, to flee their home in search of economic opportunity or humanitarian protection. And throughout this time, our focus has really remained the same, in that we are committed to processing individuals in a safe, orderly, humane way, but also enforcing a consequence regime that follows that same layout and is really looking to address and meet the moment and what we're facing today, which really brings us to the Safe Mobility Initiative, right? Which is something that here at DHS we have partnered in close coordination with our Department of State colleagues, who I believe a few are lucky enough to join you in the room today and have likely discussed this topic at length in prior conversations, to really reflect our commitment to this conceptual framework and serve in a manner that promotes access to available lawful pathways for migrants throughout the hemisphere. And it's through this close partnership and coordination with international partners such as UNHCR and IOM, as well as other foreign governments, that we launched this effort in June 2023 in 4 Western Hemisphere countries. So we have an established SMO in Guatemala, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Ecuador. So what we've done here is that we've established in close coordination with host country governments and these international organizations these SMOs throughout the region that of course are administered by UNHCR, HCR, and IOM. And they're really designed to serve as regional hubs where prospective migrants can receive credible information about the US immigration system, as well as sites where migrants can access free screenings for potential lawful pathways, not only to the United States, but to other partner countries as well. I think this is such a critical piece here, is that what we are faced with is a constant barrage of mis and disinformation throughout the migration space, right? And so what SMOs do, amongst other things, is really establish this central voice and this established bank of information for individuals to trust and to follow through with that process. Which is, of course, an alternative to the dangerous and irregular routes and mis and disinformation that is so often conveyed by bad actors in hopes of exploiting migrants along this journey. So what these SMOs do, right, and again, in close partnership with our partners, is that it presents opportunities and allows migrants to register for these different opportunities that include protection pathways, right? So admission or access to the U.S. refugee admissions process, but also not just humanitarian pathways, right? I think we all know that there are a number of other factors that encourage or lead to individuals leaving their homes, whether that is in search of economic opportunity or fleeing dictatorships and other regimes that are taking away their freedoms. What we are looking here is that we recognize that there is a true need for humanitarian protection, but that doesn't resolve all of the issues that we're seeing. And so in addition to those pathways, we also offer information on other lawful pathways, which include employment-based pathways, family-based pathways to the United States, but also to other partner countries as well. And so what we've done in each SMO, depending on which SMO we're talking about, we serve a range of nationalities and really to the largest groups of migrants that we have ultimately seen transit the hemisphere and ultimately arrive at the US-Mexico border. So our primary focus right now in these groups are looking at nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Colombia. And what the process really is, it's a simple process where individuals include their information in an online registration form, which is simply answering a series of questions that basically triage an individual's needs based on their potential protection need or suitability for other pathways. Migrants can then schedule a meeting with either UNHCR or IOM for further processing. For those who are screened to likely be eligible for refugee processing and resettlement in the United States, they are referred directly to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, for which we've built capacity in all of these host countries and modified our processes in that space to really streamline those steps and process refugees much more quickly than we have in the past. What has normally taken years in this context has really been shortened to just a shorter, months-long process, really allowing individuals, both migrants, host countries, and the U.S. to see progress in a more timely fashion. For those who are without an identified protection need, our partners at IOM also provide counseling services on options that they may be eligible for and suitable for, and provide information on how to take those next steps, which of course depend on the pathway. Those may occur outside of the SMO itself, but at least it is a starting point to point migrants in that right direction to establish what they are eligible for. And just to give this a little bit more context and to see what we've done so far in just over the year that we've had these processes established. Since June 2023, more than 256,000 individuals have submitted a free application online to access these services, and more than 22,000 refugees have arrived in the United States through this Safe Mobility Initiative. I'm recently just back from Bogota in Colombia and had the opportunity to see this play out on the ground, and it is truly a remarkable process, and very thankful to our partners at UNHCR and IOM who have really done tremendous work and continue to do tremendous work. And lastly, I would just point out that while we are highlighting pathways to other countries, right, through the Safe Mobility Initiative, what's really critical as well is that tens of thousands of applicants who have applied through this process have already looked to remain and rebuild their lives in local host communities as well, right? So this is not just a benefit to partner countries who are looking to resettle and accept referrals from this initiative, but also host countries and communities are also benefiting from this as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Delgado. I would have a zillion of questions to ask, but in the interest of time, I've selected one, and it relates to the mention of disinformation in migration space as an important part of migration management, and in particular prevention of irregular migration. And building trust takes time. Safe mobility offices are rather a fresh concept, year and a half into its implementation. So what would be your take on fighting disinformation in the migration space? Have you identified any strategies that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we've done really is this partnership within the U.S. government, but also with our international partners, that looks to identify some of the information that we've seen and address it immediately. Within the Department of Homeland Security and in close partnership with our Department of State colleagues, we look to identify some of the trends and emerging mis and disinformation that we see in region, right? Whether that is through our contacts at embassies and media teams throughout the region, but also on social media. And we look to release and put out information that is accurate, easy to understand, and that is easily shareable in the form of social media or through WhatsApp groups and things of that nature that really make it clear what our policies mean. So far, we have been able to push and extend our footprint in messaging throughout the region. Over the last couple of years, I believe we've made some pretty significant progress in being able to turn around and address this mis and disinformation quite quickly. However, as I'm sure we're all aware, it is a constant uphill battle. We are constantly battling information or actors who don't care what the truth is, right? They're only looking to profit from lies, and that does create a challenge. But I think working together with foreign governments and international partners has really led to some successes in that space.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frouws. Mixed Migration Center has very recently published a report on the Safe Mobility Offices titled The Influence of Safe Mobility Offices on Mixed Migration in Latin America. And then in the course of preparing this report, you have conducted a range of interviews with various actors involved with SMOs. What are your key findings? And what did you find to be the added value of SMOs, limitations, and similar?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this panel and inviting me to speak about this study on the safe mobility offices. Yeah, the reason, maybe to go back there, the reason we started this research was that the first time we heard about this initiative, we thought, okay, this is a new, bold and innovative approach to address the challenges of irregular migration. We keep hearing also throughout today the need to provide safe and legal migration channels as an alternative to irregular migration and to reduce people's reliance on people smugglers. And the SMOs that were set up by the United States in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Guatemala and Costa Rica are potentially offering just that. And I think importantly, all of this in a context of really high numbers of people on the move, as Mr. Delgado said as well. More than 2 million people on an annual basis encounters on the US southern border. That is much more than all the Mediterranean routes to Europe combined. So I think it's really important to keep in mind these numbers as well that the United States is facing on its southern border. So initially, when I first heard about the SMO initiative, I thought these were offices in transit countries, whether physical offices or not, where people could go and apply, like literally apply for 1 out of 4 possible legal channels. So refugee resettlement, humanitarian parole, family reunification, and labor migration pathways. So almost like a one-stop shop where people can go and learn all about and potentially also access these various legal migration pathways that exist into the United States and a select number of other countries as well. Now what we found, and as Mr. Delgado said as well, the reality is a little bit more complex than that. So going to the key findings. I mean, first of all, I really want to stress this is a great initiative and it really has huge potential. I think it really shows a real effort in providing substantial, safe and legal pathways. And very important also in really increasing regional solidarity in the issue of addressing mixed migration, irregular migration. And I think it also shows what is possible with the right level of political will and also with good cooperation between agencies, UNHCR, IOM, and between countries of destination, transit and origin. And the SMOs have been very successful in facilitating expedited and accessible refugee resettlement. Relatively large numbers of refugees have been resettled, much faster than usually through the SMOs. So I think that part really works very well. They've definitely averted a significant number of people away from these dangerous, irregular, smuggler-facilitated movements towards the southern border of the US. We did find a couple of shortcomings. And I think it's also important there to stress this is a really new initiative. It's only been there for 1.5 years, so of course there's always limitations and shortcomings. So first of all, the SMOs so far don't really facilitate access to other migration pathways other than refugee resettlement. They primarily provide information on those other pathways. So in our opinion, they don't focus enough on these other important legal pathways, legal migration options like work permits for labor migrants. And I think that's an element that could also really help in significantly reducing irregular migration. We also found that the eligibility criteria are too restrictive. So only a limited number of nationalities and individuals who meet fairly specific criteria qualify for the SMOs. And that means that we found that some of the people that might be most in need of assistance, but also most likely to be in transit, to engage in dangerous onward movement and to rely on smugglers, might actually be excluded from services through the SMOs. And then there's some smaller key findings from our research around the role of civil society, which could be improved, and the accessibility of the technology that comes along with it, that is being used. But maybe in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail on those. But maybe to summarize, the SMOs are, I think, a really creative and much needed approach to managing migration, with huge potential, but we're not there yet. And I think in the way they currently operate, they're unlikely to have a really big impact on the irregular migration dynamics, but we also have to be realistic there. With 2 million encounters on the southern border and so far 22,000 people who have been resettled, that is still a relatively small number. But I think it's definitely a start. And then finally, one point I really want to stress, it is important that the SMOs or something like it, if we're discussing replicability in a European context, will not replace but always complement the right to access territorial asylum at the border.
Would you find migrants to be in the center of this approach?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it is offering information, it's offering options to people. We spoke to a fairly large number of migrants in all the 4 countries where the SMOs currently operate. And we heard some really positive stories from migrants that said these SMOs are giving hope. Also the speed with which resettlement is taking place for a significant number of people, that has really been giving hope and opportunities to people. And many of them have actually entered the United States and a select number of other countries, and they're rebuilding their lives there. So yes, I think in that extent the migrants are at the center of this approach.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for introducing the second part of the panel, which are questions related to scalability and adaptability. And I will first ask Mr. Delgado. It's a 1.5 year old initiative, if we can say old in this context. Is there a plan to scale up the SMOs? And if so, did you identify already some improvements that you would want to introduce in the future if the scaling up takes place? And would you find scaling up to be the good response to demand that is identified?
Sure thing, and please let me thank my colleague, Mr. Frouws, for mentioning and putting it in the broader context of what we're seeing at the southern border. The numbers have truly been staggering, you know, since the lifting of what we had in place during the COVID-19 pandemic. And while we've seen ebbs and flows, we did peak in December of last year, where we were seeing upwards of 10,000 migrants a day arriving at our southern border. And thankfully, we have taken a number of measures since then to address that flow. However, you know, as mentioned, we are continuing to see, you know, numbers that we have not necessarily been used to, or really what our immigration system was, you know, truly meant to address, which has really led to some of these novel ideas, especially, you know, like the Safe Mobility Initiative. And so as far as looking to scale these up or expand, that is exactly what we're looking to do. Right. And, you know, thankfully, we have made some progress there. And of course, there's always room for improvement as we start to see and really bore out the successes, as you mentioned, just 1.5 years. But we're looking to build and expand upon those in the future. And again, along with partners and other like-minded countries and international partners and organizations who are willing to participate. So in order to broaden access to lawful pathways through the Safe Mobility Initiative, we forged important partnerships with our prospective destination countries in North America, but also Europe as well. A really great example of the cooperation that we've seen so far is on display in our partnerships with Spain and Canada, who also accept referrals for lawful pathways from our SMOs. For example, Spain participates via 2 resettlement protection pathways for certain Nicaraguan refugees screened at the Costa Rican SMO, which these pathways are a traditional resettlement program, but and another program involving resettlement for protection concerns that match the refugees to job offers in Spain. Right, so this is one way that we're looking to other partners to broaden what we are offering and the information that is being shared at the SMOs. In terms of Canada, what we've seen here is that Canada has provided links and information regarding their current programs via the SMO portal website. Again, this is that website that individuals can go to submit their application, which includes permanent resettlement and temporary labor programs. Specifically in relation to Canada, they've advertised a new humanitarian pathway that launched last year for 11,000 Haitian, Venezuelan, and Colombian foreign nationals who have family connections to Canada, right? So this is really another example of how it's not just one country acting, but really how we can broaden our reach and include other partner countries who are in a situation to where they can accept referrals here. I'm happy to note that we have since expanded to additional partner countries as well, just recently with the government of New Zealand, who has signed on to accept referrals through these SMOs as well. So we're looking to that continued partnership, as we continue to build upon those relationships. But again, this is really, been made possible by the great work being done in partnership with UNHCR and IOM, right? Who have launched different efforts to see how we can better our process, right? And one of these includes the SMO Skills Survey, right? And what this does is really help us better understand the profiles of individuals that we are seeing, right? And their profiles in terms of education, skills, work experience, as well as language and family links between the United States, Spain, and Canada. So we are continuing to analyze those results as they come in, but we've already seen some trends in the data that we've received about employment histories or education and how that can better inform our interagency and bilateral and multilateral discussions that allow and provide additional safe migrant pathways for individuals who register through this initiative. So what that has really allowed us to do is put real life data, right, from the individuals that we are looking to help into good use, right? And that better informs our next steps. So as we look to expand this process, we actually have real life examples and real life data to back up what our next steps could be and really help navigate that system through these multilateral and bilateral conversations that we're having with partner countries and international organizations. But I think importantly, what is really key here again, and this sort of bit I think folks may be picking up as a trend in these remarks specifically, is that the future of these successes, right, and these processes are really built upon partnerships, right, and cooperation. And so it's really up to us as governments, but also partnering with international organizations and non-governmental organizations. Earlier, my colleague had mentioned the private sector. That is such a key aspect to this, right? Because that allows us to branch out and offer additional opportunities. Simply the reality is that, as everyone here knows, is that the challenges of irregular migration do not just simply impact one country, right? It impacts many, whether it is the receiving country, the destination country, or transit countries in between. And so we all really have that shared responsibility to address those challenges in a way that promotes safe, orderly, and humane migration, which has really led and been the backbone of what we've done here in the Western Hemisphere in terms of the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, where we joined an additional 21 countries that acknowledge the shared responsibility, but also looking to address this from a regional perspective and promote a framework that's built on addressing those root causes, but also supporting the integration of migrants wherever they may be, and expanding those lawful pathways while strengthening enforcement efforts as well, right? Because this is really a package. So as long as we can continue to look to international partners, maybe not just here in the hemisphere, but really around the world, as is evident with Spain and New Zealand coming on board to engage on this project as well. I think that's really where the future is, and we're excited to continue that effort.
It is indeed very encouraging to hear that already there is some sort of scalability in place, maybe not the one we had on our mind when we designed the question, but definitely addressing the need, and that is, again, quite encouraging. Mr. Frouws, you said new, bold, and innovative approach. And do we need one in Europe? And with everything that we've heard about different types and kinds of centers and safe mobility offices and their functions, and knowing the European context that we've been hearing a lot about during the day, would SMOs be a good response to the needs and challenges that Europe is currently facing? And what would be your suggestions for an EU-wide approach?
Yeah. Thank you. I would probably split my answer in three here. First of all, should it be replicated? Absolutely, yes. Could it be replicated? Yes, but with the right political will. Will it be replicated? I highly doubt it. So that's a very short and simple answer. To maybe put a few more words to that. I think it should be replicated because this really, as I said earlier, has huge potential to make a real difference, especially if some of the shortcomings that I mentioned earlier are addressed. It would clarify to potential migrants what legal pathways are available. It would be an opportunity to bring access to all those legal pathways basically together under one roof. It would show to migrants, but also really importantly, show to transit and origin countries that Europe is serious about providing regular and safe migration pathways, both for protection as well as for labor purposes. And I think that could also really help build better relations and more equal and maybe less transactional partnerships between Europe and transit and destination countries. It would help in matching labor demand, which is high in many countries in Europe, with potential migrant workers in a more collective, cross-European coordinated manner. So yes, absolutely, it should be replicated. Could it be replicated? It's not easy, but I don't see why not. I mean, yes, you know, the EU is 27 different countries that all have different objectives, different priorities. Yes, migration is a very hot political topic, but I think that's the same in the United States. And the United States is also composed of different states with different approaches and different political leadership as well. So I think ultimately this does come down to political will, to leadership, and to resources. And if I see what kind of resources Europe is able to mobilize for migration management in the past 10 years or so, I don't think resources, financial resources, are the issue here. But I think political will might be the issue, and that brings me to the last point. Will it be replicated in a European context? I doubt it, to be honest. Right now I don't see many signs across Europe that point to the EU being ready to adopt a new joint and more positive approach, a more humane approach to better manage irregular migration and better organize safe and legal migration pathways, even though the needs are there. And many countries are actually mobilizing increased regular migration. They do it on their own. And they don't really link this, and we heard that before today during the discussion, they don't really link it to the approach to reduce irregular migration. And we have the pact after so many years of negotiations. And before the implementation even starts, we already see calls in various countries to adjust it again, to make it stricter or even opt out from it. So I think the current trajectory we're seeing in Europe overall seems to be more restrictions, more externalization, as we heard in the previous panel, more securitization, but I don't really see a serious discussion on expanding regular migration pathways. So in that sense, I'm not overly optimistic that Europe will replicate a model like the safe mobility offices, but I think we should keep on pushing for it, and we're happy to discuss it further how this could be done.
Yeah, let's push together. And Mr. Schmitz-Hoffmann, my last question for you. GIZ Centers for Migration and Development mainly work with people in the countries where they are established, but GIZ also provides different kinds of support to people on the move as well towards Europe. And could you give us, as a final learning package today, some examples of such initiatives that you believe would be good for application?
Yeah, sure, because I think, as it has been mentioned, transit countries are super important as well in that chain, on that migration chain. And if we want to address that substantially, we'll also have to work on that chain and in the transit countries. Now, what we did as one example is we worked in Serbia and in a regional approach commissioned by by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and to address Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia because they have the highest number of migrants, asylum seekers and refugees in that area, and there were tensions coming up with the local communities. So we invested in a community building approach and set up on the one hand rather soft measures like sports events or cultural activities. On the second, we very much supported the local communities and municipalities to have the capacity to deal also with the administrative procedures and set up the respective services needed for the amount of people. And the third, we also supported open training courses to scale up the respective skills, not only of the people on the move, but also on the local communities. And what we saw was actually that it positively affected both on the one hand, of course, the reception of the people on the move, but on the other hand, also the perspectives for people who wanted to migrate and the respective local perspectives for the people in the communities. A second topic that or example that I can refer to is from Turkey, where the system is currently hosting over 3.4 million Syrian refugees, and again commissioned by the BMZ, the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. We designed a project that is focusing basically on three levels. On the one hand, on the refugees, on the second, on the Turkish population, and the third, on the establishment of respective strong institutions that can actually handle the challenges. And we supported a whole package, starting from education to the refugees, psychosocial support, mental health services for the refugees who often suffered quite a dramatic experience during their path. We promoted social cohesion with workshops and activities, job replacement, and we also supported entrepreneurship activities to establish small businesses, etc. And eventually, only last year, we achieved the cooperation with more than 330,000 refugees and 270,000 individuals from the host communities, and 60% of them again were women. So again, the female focus could be emphasized, and we see that together with also other institutions like ECHO and partnerships that we created on the ground, we are now unfolding that further and also trying to see how we can translate that system into other countries like Ukraine. So we see that refugees are better accepted, that you do have an impact in the respective different areas that you're investing in, and that with that also people on the move are better accepted by the respective countries where they are staying.
So investment in community cohesion in the long term improves perspectives.
Yeah, I think you have to invest in both people and institutions. And again, it's very much about cooperation. It's about also experimenting a little bit. We have seen that some things that we tested out did not really work so well, so we changed, and for example, the sports activities were really accepted. I mean, even if there are soft measures, and you might say, yeah, oh, come on, sports events, but they had a big impact. And I think this is what we have to really think of, what can be innovatively tested, and how can we then scale up and roll that out more broadly.
Thank you very much. I'm checking whether we have still time for a couple of questions. Yes, so if there are any questions from the audience, please, one hand is already up, second there. We take these two questions and then we wrap up.
Okay, hello. My name is Paul Kluitz. I'm from CFAR Foundation. Among other things, we specialize in communicating with migrants. I have two very short questions which are kind of related. The first is you talked about misinformation and disinformation. Can you elaborate a bit on that? How bad is it? I mean, are we talking about large scale or large amount of people who are not accessing SMOs because of disinformation? And is it disinformation or is it just confusion? It'd be interesting to unpack that. And then the second question is about the people who are ultimately resettled through the SMOs to the United States. How important is it to demonstrate that they would have been on that irregular journey and turned up at the southern border? Or perhaps you already can demonstrate that and you do know. Just interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. There was a second question here.
Thank you. I'm Florencio from the Migration Youth and Children Platform. My question would be more on the context that around 33% of youth or international migrants are youth. I would be interested to know if you can expand in the mobility centers and all of the efforts that you are doing. There is any action that are youth focused when it comes to information, access to services, protection, and also development.
I believe that first question was for Mr. Delgado because it's related very much to the work of SMOs. And the second question for both panelists here, it's I wouldn't be in position, I must say, to repeat it. So I may ask you to clarify it a bit. But Mr. Yeah. Let's wait for clarification.
Thank you. My question is if on the information centers you have youth-focused initiatives, especially when it comes to information, access to services, protection, and also development, mainly focused on young migrants, considering that those are it's considered that around 33% of international migrants are people under 30. So that would be my question.
Referral services, if I understood well.
I couldn't completely hear, sorry.
Which initiative?
Maybe we start with the first question,
The question
Mr.
was,
Delgado.
how are services targeted towards individuals who are under the age of 30, given that a large percentage of individuals that are migrating are under the age of 30?
Yeah?
Please, I think the first question was more related to the functioning of the safe mobility offices, so maybe we give you a word for that.
Yeah, so, you know, I think going back to the mis and disinformation that we're seeing, right? I wouldn't frame it as that it's mis or disinformation towards SMOs, right? But it's a little bit more broader than that. Really about mis and disinformation about U.S. immigration policy. For example, right now in June, we announced President Biden issued a presidential proclamation that significantly altered the way we process asylum at the southern border, right? So the fact is that it is much harder to claim asylum while this is in effect during times of high border encounters. Very general framing there. But what we see anytime we change a policy, you know, looking back to the COVID-19 measures that we had in place and we were looking to lift those, the mis and disinformation is really more about, you know, this policy is going to change, so you need to hurry up and get to the border to make your way in because then you're going to be able to stay. Or look at all of these people who are not being returned, which is false, right? Because the reality is that the U.S. has returned or removed more than 1 million people in this last fiscal year, more than any other year since 2010, right? But if you are a cartel or a transnational organization that is looking to profit off of getting people across the border, you will look to whatever lies and mis and disinformation that you can say in order to mislead individuals to taking your services to make sure that they can get across, right? So what the Safe Mobility Initiative really is another tool and mechanism that we put downstream to disincentivize the use of that irregular journey, of those bad actors. So now people have an alternative, right? They don't have to rely on smugglers or the mis and disinformation there, but they can look to official sources that are closer to home, right? Rather than looking to other sources of information, whether that's on TikTok or WhatsApp or through community outreach and those sorts of things. So that's sort of where the mis and disinformation that we're seeing comes into play. And that's really something that we're trying to get ahead of is, one, acknowledge what the real policy is, right? What are the real consequences for people who don't use this lawful pathway, which include being returned or removed to your home country or a third country, and just making sure that people understand the options that they actually have out there. That second piece of the first question was about how we, or should we, show that these lawful pathways are working. And I think that's very critical, right? Not only to individuals in the United States, but to individuals who are thinking of migrating, right? If you are seeing progress, if you are seeing these examples of how things have played out, right? Where, there are other options for people to come in a safe, orderly, and lawful way rather than trekking through the Darien jungle or, at the hands of cartels and other transnational organizations that are looking to exploit you. I mean, that goes a long way, right? For example, speaking of one family that we had interviewed, there was a mixed status family. So there was a family in Central America the husband decided they were going to make the irregular journey, right? Ultimately, they showed up at the southern border. They were processed for expedited removal and ultimately returned, right? The wife and child stayed behind, sought the Safe Mobility Initiative, and they were ultimately processed for resettlement in the United States, right? So this is one of those examples how testimony and real life examples actually show both the benefits and the consequences of choosing or not choosing to use one of the lawful pathways that we have in place.
Thank you very much, and we are already above our time, but I will still allow that at least a fragment of the second question is answered. Is there an age limitation when applying for referral services through Centers for Migration and Development?
No.
Yes, please. Targeting youth? Are you targeting youth and young people through Centers for Migration and Development?
Well, it's pretty much demand driven. So whoever approaches the centers, it's open for the people. And of course, there are different target groups, but it's open. So in that regard, of course, everybody is invited to use the services provided in the respective centers. And then, as I mentioned, the service provision varies a little bit depending on the respective circumstances of the particular country, but in general, it's open for everybody.
Yes, well, what we experience in some region is that majority of people intending to migrate and seeking out these types of support are young men. So I think it sometimes is a given that programs are designed more to respond to these kinds of needs, but there wouldn't be a limitation. And of course, we always look to ensure that gender is properly applied throughout, even if the interest of women to migrate from some regions is
I think the figures that we see is, and this is of course because Germany is also following that vision of female development policy, and we see that this is unfolding really in the figures. So the high percentage of female participants in the centers is illustrating, I think, that we really get to that target group.
Yes, I want to thank you very much for what you have shared with us today. Our objective was to learn, analyze, and understand what would be the best for our future work in this arena, and I'm sure that many of the discussions we had today will influence practices in the future, and we look forward to learning more from your experiences in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.